am a big believer that in order to see change, you have to be active about it.
Welcome back to The Sustainable Act. I'm Smiley Karana. Thank you for tuning in. On this podcast, we're diving deep into earth-loving, thought-provoking, and inspiring conversations. Today, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Natasha Thom, who is such a big inspiration. She's the founder and planner of Clearwater Events, where she works to plan weddings, community events, fundraisers, and more with a focus on sustainability. She is also the founder of the Cascadia Wedding Show, the first sustainable wedding show in North America. Natasha, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me. Wow, what an introduction.
I mean, I don't think that was enough. Like you're so incredible in the work you've done, and just like getting to watch you over the last few years that I've known you, I'm like, oh my God, like what's next? Because you're always like, here's another thing, and like just breaking barriers. And so I'm so grateful to have you in the show.
Thank you. And it's so funny because I always call myself like this accidental entrepreneur, and sort of think of all these things and initiatives that is like spurted from all of this is so cool.
Yeah, it's so inspiring because you're a go-getter. Like that's what the overall vibe I get from you. It's like you see something, you're like, let's go and change it, or let's go do this, or let's like, invent this new ideology. And like that's so rare in the world, and we need more people like you. So I'm very excited. I already know this is going to be such a good episode because I think not only reaching like other event planners, but anyone that wants to start something and they don't know how or where, or I think they can be inspired by you. So
Yeah, let's dive in. Ask me all the questions you want.
all right. So can you let me know how you got into sustainability, and like where did that spark from?
Yeah, so I've been planning events for goodness, must be like almost 15 years now. So I started back in high school as a way to get my volunteer service credit. We had to do mandatory volunteering. It was something nominal, like 20 hours, but I found that I loved it. I had this knack for it, and I never really thought that it would become a career option. And then I was doing this conference a handful of years ago, and I was standing in our green room, and no joke, it was floor to ceiling boxes of swag. And so inside those boxes were notebooks that were individually wrapped, pens that were individually wrapped, and then water bottles and all of these other pieces that were individually wrapped in plastic inside of a box. And I just thought, if this event has 500 people and we have this much waste, how can we sustain our planet? Like there has got to be a better way to do things. And so that's what like piqued my curiosity and started me learning and just like finding out more about this space. And at the end of 2018, we made a really clear shift in the business. And now all the clients that we work with incorporate sustainability in some form or fashion, which is honestly amazing.
Yeah, so you've been in event planning since high school then, like or with events. And when did you start your business?
Yeah, so I started the business back in 2016, so it'll be 4 years this summer.
Oh, nice. And what challenges did you face like when you introduced this new concept? So when you brought this idea of like going sustainable, because I'm assuming like event planning, it's very consuming. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of resources you're using, like you said, single use items. So what challenges did you face when you introduced this idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny for Vancouver, right? It's like we live in what's supposedly the greenest city or a city that's striving to be green, but that's not necessarily the feeling that you get when you're a professional in this industry. Not a ton of vendors incorporate sustainability, really know much about it. And so for me, as a newbie coming into this space, it meant I had to do a lot of learning, a lot of growing, and like continue to be curious. And it took a lot of work to find vendors that had similar values as me. We're fortunate now that a few years in, it's becoming more commonplace, but still, the community and the network is tight and it's still very small.
Hmm. And with your business, can you tell me a little bit more about what Clearwater Events is, and like what your mission is with it, and your goal, and who you serve?
So when I started Clearwater back in 2016, the name behind it. So when I think of Clearwater, I think of Zen, I think of a calming influence, and I think of transparency. And so that's how we actually landed on the name, which, sidebar, is actually a small town in northern BC, which is so funny. Um, so transparency is a big one for us, and community and connection, and obviously local and sustainability. And so for me, when I think about the events that we do and the initiatives that we do, it has to incorporate all those values in some form or fashion. And so it started doing weddings and more smaller DIY budget, not necessarily sustainable. And then I felt this pull a year or so in. I'm like, I miss community, I miss my people, and I miss my roots. And so that's when we brought back in the community event side of things. And it's been really rewarding to have a team that supports both of my loves and now lets me focus more on the education and doing fun things like this while they continue to execute and do all the day-to-day pieces of the planning.
Hmm. And was it 2018 that you launched the Cascadia Wedding Show?
So 2020 would have been our third year.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So, can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, because that is, am I correct? It's the first sustainable wedding show in North America.
It is, at least in Canada, North America, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
And for me, it was really about how can we support both consumers, our couples, as well as the industry. So with sustainable weddings still being fairly new and a new terminology, I wanted to find a way to amplify our impact in a way that didn't necessarily take so much time. Obviously, planning a wedding show is a huge feat, but I didn't necessarily want to have like a million one-on-one conversations. I wanted to have a bigger reach in a single setting, if that makes sense. And so Cascadia in its first iteration was more about supporting local and our very Vancouver West Coast vibe. And then 2019 really became, okay, how can we push the sustainable mandate? And we were so fortunate to partner with Van City on that initiative and get a lot of support from their community. And 2020 was really exciting because we actually had the opportunity to expand down to San Diego. And then 2021 was supposed to be an expansion into Toronto. So this pandemic has thrown a little bit of a wrench into things, but hopefully we'll get back on track soon.
Yeah, no, I have high hopes. And like, I mean, speaking of the pandemic, because it's something we can't ignore. Like, are you able to tell us like what plans you have currently for 2020, and like, are you altering those the wedding show plans, or are you just postponing, or?
You know, it's been really tricky. I am a part of local vendor groups and masterminds trying to figure out, like, what do we see this industry looking like in the future? Do we see a shift to online virtual events? Do we see it to be more postponements? Because I do think, and I'm a firm believer, that online will never replace in person because those in person connections are so critical to just like the way that we build relationships as human beings. And so, I would like to see some sort of Cascadia wedding show this year. It'll likely be smaller, a lot more virtual, but the hope is that we come back bigger and stronger in 2021.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree, especially you being in like that industry, the event industry, that in person, communication and connection has nothing over virtual experiences. But
Mhm.
also as like a event planner, I'm assuming like trying to adapt to like more of virtual, or that's like a challenge in its own. But
It's been really hard. I mean,
mhm.
when I think of like the couples and the weddings that we plan, we had weddings in the spring and the summer of 2020 that postponed into the fall that are now getting postponed again into 2021. So it's been really challenging, and I feel so bad for like all of these both clients, community, corporate, and weddings that are having to put their lives on hold or find alternative ways to host these like very meaningful moments.
Yeah, that is a tough one because I know myself, like a lot of people that have had to postpone their plans, and but like I guess keeping like again high hope that like you come back bigger and stronger
Mhm.
and it'll be even better than what you had planned. What has been like a lesson that you've learned over your journey of being a sustainable event planner? So whether it's events or like weddings or community events, what's been like the biggest lesson you learned?
It's a good question. I think as an entrepreneur, we're built to be resilient and we're always learning, growing, and changing. And so I think sort of my advice and my own learning lessons have always been to continue to be curious, continue to ask those questions. And I'm a big believer in putting yourself into a room where I feel dumb and trying to learn from all these incredible smart people that are in our community. And so trying to foster those connections and learning from people that are way more knowledgeable than I am has been a really big key to where I am now.
I love that. That's like an advice that I go by too, is like always try to be the dumbest person in the room because that's how you become, because like once you're the smartest, you got to leave that room, and then that's how you keep learning
Exactly.
and growing. That actually ties in with my next question, is like what advice would you give to a event planner or this like somebody in this industry that wants to go more sustainable but has no idea where to start? Or because I know coming from a film background, when you introduce like the concept of sustainability, it's daunting. People are like, what? Like, you
Hmm.
can't, especially because it's been a certain way for so many years and so long. So, what advice would you give to someone that's like considering it but has no idea where to start?
It's so interesting. I feel like we're creatures of habit as human beings. And
Yeah.
so we get used to things, and change is hard, right? Like, I will be the first to acknowledge that change is hard. And this pandemic has sort of forced us to live in that discomfort. But for people that are wanting to get into this space or like explore this space and see if it's something that they want to continue in, I would say, what are your objectives? So, like, what sustainability objectives or goals do you have for either you as an individual, you as a business, you as a bigger organization? Like, what goals do you have? And start small, start attainable, think those SMART goals. So, for me, my big lofty end goal is to make sustainability accessible to everyone and for that to become the norm. And so education is a big part of what I do, because to get to accessibility, you have to educate the community. And then the second step is, how do you engage both your team, if you have one? How do you engage your community partners, your vendors, and those that you work with? Because if, ultimately, if you don't have buy in, then you can't really foster that change in a meaningful, authentic, amplifiable, scalable way. And then the third is, how do you get the buy-in from your community? So you have the buy-in from your team and your internal network, but how do you push that out into the world so that they fall more in love with you and continue to buy from you or work with you or whatever your business model is?
Nice. I love that. And I feel like this can tie into like any industry, any
Hmm.
business, any individual, because ultimately, like you look at your end goal and then the steps you take to get to that goal. And I
Hmm.
love that.
I will say, like, sustainability for me was something that came by happenstance. So as much as I was an accidental entrepreneur, I also fell into the sustainability space. But now that I'm in it, I feel like you and so many other people, I am so passionate about it. And it's something that I want to talk to until I turn blue in the face. And for me, as I think about the business and my own personal brand, I think about how can I continue to amplify and scale my impact and continue to do better and be better. And so for me, that means, how can I become a global holistic lifestyle brand? And there's now so many new initiatives that are in the pipeline that we're hoping to launch in 2020 that will now get table for 2021. Um, but how can we build a full lifestyle brand so that I think food, I think beauty, I think fashion, I think weddings and events, of course, but of all the materials and products that we use, how can we incorporate that into one big organization?
And that's so great. That's actually so perfect because that's, coming from an industry, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can connect to this because their careers or jobs are, it's focused on entirely like one thing. Like you said, it's either like food based or it's, material, but they're focusing on that. And that's good that you should be focusing on your individual impact and what your you're creating, and like,
Hmm.
but you are thinking overall, and it's like, that's huge. Like thinking overall as a brand, but like how you bring together all these different industries together and how you can have that larger scale impact. I'm sure that's like super tough, but like you said, as long as you feel passionate and you're always willing to learn.
And I also feel like so much of it is intertwined, right? So some of the best practices in fashion will correspond or relate to weddings and events and food and floral. So it only made sense for me to tap into all of those things, and continue to expand the network. And so we're really excited to tease a couple of things on the podcast, actually. So we're launching a pop-up dinner series similar to the Greasy Spoon, if anyone has heard of it before. So it'll be a monthly pop-up dinner, all around using produce from food waste. So using food waste as the core ingredients for your dinner, and then pairing that with like cocktails and local beers and things. And then also a floral repurposing project that's really in tandem to our events and weddings. So how can we use all the florals from your event, take them home at the end of the night, rebundle, donate them, and then once they've lived their lifespan at that other location, like a hospice or a hospital or a care home, we take them back and compost them at one of our facilities.
Wow, that's amazing.
Hmm.
And I was actually talking to a friend about the flowers, like just that as an example, that when you host an event or you, right, or planning an event, there's so many little things like the flowers or just those decorations that you don't really think about once you leave the event or once it's over. But realizing like, just that cycle of like those materials or things that you could, even with things like flowers that do end up dying and you can't really keep forever, but how can you extend the life and make good use out of those?
Yeah, for me, closed loop is really important, right? So when you think about reducing our impact from a sustainability standpoint, how do we close loop all the materials that we're using? So we're doing something similar with candles as a way to remelt, remold, and reuse them. Um, Similar to food, how do we divert the food waste and use it in a more sustainable way? So it's been really interesting. And I think as much as this pandemic has obviously hurt so many of us and it's giving us cabin fever, I think it also spurs creativity and innovation. And so I think I'm a testament to that. I may have been a little bit overproductive in my first few weeks.
That's like, I don't think that's a bad thing though. Like I can connect to that. That's what how this podcast was born, and just like, if it weren't for that break that we all were forced to have, we may not have had the time to sit down and kind of reflect and innovate, like you said. And
Hmm.
yeah. What advice would you give to someone, like, let's say a couple or a bride that's like planning her wedding or his, and has no idea where to start but wants to reduce their waste? What advice would you give to them as a
So I would say at the beginning of your planning process, think about your top priorities. So I like to say your top three. So because I'm a foodie at heart, food is really important to me, but also the guest experience is really important. So I'm always looking, how do I still make things aesthetically beautiful? And then whatever your third one is. But I say, look at your top three priorities. Your ways to become sustainable or to be a little bit more green are going to be different than maybe your friends. So if food is really important, think about like the food service style. So if you're going plated, that's great. Your portions are typically set. If you have to go buffet, when we can have them again, can you have a server on the line dishing out the food so that you're not tempted to take more food than you can perhaps eat? From a floral side of things, can you incorporate local seasonal flowers instead of having to import them, which should, in theory, save some cost for you? Um, on the paper side of things, do you have to send out 200 physical invites? Um, Absolutely send out those physical invites to like your grandparents and your mom to have in like a scrapbook, but perhaps you can use a wedding website for the millennials or your younger friends that wouldn't necessarily put a physical invite on the fridge.
nice? I love that. That's something I never thought of, but like now that I'm like thinking about it, I'm like, you're right. Like invites, like there's actually like in like one of the other episodes we were talking about business cards. It's like, do we
Hmm.
really need it unless it's like for a specific person? But things like invites, you're not gonna hold on to. I've gotten wedding invites that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna throw it out because I'm not gonna hold on to it because like I'm not the parent or like
Exactly.
that's really great. And what has been the highlight of your career so far? Like what?
Oh. That's such a hard question. I mean, recently I was a part of the Daily High feature as one of the female
Mm,
entrepreneurs for International Women's Day, which was
congrats.
amazing. And I'm so grateful for that. Back in 2018, I was recognized as 20 on the Rise through the Honeybook Creative Community, as one of their top 20 event planners globally, which again, so amazing, so cool. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of these communities. But I will say that we're just getting started. And so, as much as I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far, I feel like it's only the beginning to this like global brand that we're creating and hoping to foster.
I love that. It's just the beginning.
Hmm.
That's such a like just such a bold statement, but like
It's
so
so
true.
cheesy, but I couldn't help myself.
No, it's not cheesy at all. That's like for me, that's so inspiring. Like this is just the beginning. Like I think and that's so inspiring because I think that's a good mentality to have throughout your career and life, you know, like like if you hit a point where you're like, I peaked, this is it, like you can't really go further with
Yeah.
what you're doing and the impact that you have or continue to have. So, you know, just saying like this is the beginning and then continue making that difference, I think can go such a long way. And
Yeah. And I
yeah,
think as humans, we continue to evolve as we gain more and more experiences. And so I'm fully aware of that. What happens in 10 years, who knows where I'll be, right? So I want to leave that door open and see where things take us.
and why is this important to you?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
I know.
um, I am a big believer that in order to see change, you have to be active about it. So for me, I saw waste happening at events. I saw single use plastics. I saw all of this food being thrown out instead of, for example, donated to food banks. And I thought, I can't expect someone else to make those changes for me. And so if I want to see that change, I have to be a part of it and I want to be a part of it. And I want to help facilitate those guidelines and policies and procedures that help impact future planners or future industry professionals.
Be the change you wish to see in the world.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so awesome. I that's so inspiring again for anyone that's like no matter what your background is, what industry you're in, you know, if there's something that you think you see and you're like this should change, you can like there's nothing stopping you from going out and changing that, I think.
Hmm. And I think, again, we're such creatures of habit. And so change is always going to be challenging and you're always going to hit roadblocks or people say, why would I do that? I've been comfortable doing this for 20 years. But there will also be people that are inspired by that change and are inspired by the efficiency that you can create as a result of this new solution. So stick to those people, lean on those people, get feedback from those people, and then ultimately it creates a better world for everyone.
And like even coming back to like education because that kind of connects with this. So somebody that is wanting to educate themselves, what resources would you recommend?
So there's an amazing free online platform called Future Learn, and they have some really great online courses in around environment, sustainability, even business, and really a ton of other topics. And so in this pandemic time, I have been living for this website because it's a lot of it's more foundational. So it's a really, really great starting point. If you're new to the sustainability space, if you're new to this business space, and you just want to learn some of the terminology, the jargon, it's a really good place to start. Um, and then I'm a big believer in the power of people. So connecting with people like Smiley, other industry professionals that can tap into their networks for you, I think that's so powerful.
I have to agree because every time I talk to you, I leave so inspired and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like now what can I do to be better, be a better person and a better, you know, like individual in my career, even though our industries, it's so different, but it's so alike, I feel,
Hmm.
because we're in consuming industries, we're constantly using things one time, whether
Yeah.
it's for like a film or for an event. Um, but yeah, like connecting with other creatives or other people that have a similar mindset or that you want to be more like. I think that the power in
Hmm.
that, you're right, it has such a, especially just being inspired. And I think I remember talking to someone who said something similar, where as soon as she became interested in sustainability, she started talking to other, you know, people interested in sustainability, and she felt like, oh, that's all she talks about, or she talks too much about it. But I'm like, but you're not. It's because you're
Hmm.
constantly surrounded by that, that you feel like, okay, now this is all I talk about. But then when you look out to the outer world, there's not enough people talking about it. And
Yeah.
that goes for anything. I think when you find that thing that you're passionate about, whether it's sustainability or whether it's like a type of art or whatever it is, like business, um, you know, there's gonna be like a majority of the world that isn't speaking your language,
Hmm.
but connect with those that are, and then you can come together and have such a big impact
Yeah.
on.
Exactly. And honestly, when I started talking about sustainability, I didn't really know much. And so I just put it out on social, like, hey, I'm curious about this. If you know anyone or if you're a leader in the space, like, I would love to connect. I did lot of Instagram DMing and emailing and just trying to talk to people. And as your network grows, naturally, you're just going to talk about it more. Um, and people, if they really are behind you and they appreciate you, they will like absorb all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's how, because when we first started talking, I didn't know anything about sustainability,
Hmm.
and I think my interest in it peaked a little later into my career. And I remember you were always so, like, I remember coming to you, and then I don't know, it was so inspiring, like, when you find other people that are interested in that. And
Hmm.
what things do you do in your personal life to go more green and, reduce your environmental impact?
It's interesting. I mean, when I was living on my own, I found it a little bit easier because I could implement my own best practices and my own values. Now, temporarily during the pandemic, I'm back at home caring for my parents. And so seeing their own, like the way that they live their life is more challenging because they'll go to the grocery store and buy everything that's in single use plastics. And so that's really challenging and has forced some of that conversation. Um, but I try and live a more minimal lifestyle. So how can I like use different products or get products with no packaging? I love shopping at Nada and those sort of refilleries that reduce the waste.
I agree. I also recently just moved back home, and like it definitely is way tougher when you're living with a family or just different people that
Hmm.
it's harder to go entirely zero waste, because my whole job is based around being more sustainable and reducing waste. But then I find myself in situations where I'm also now part of the problem because I don't have
Yeah.
another choice. And I think a lot of people can connect with that too. I think that's an important discussion. Is like, you could be very passionate and you have this good heart, but it's just with the circumstance you're in. I always try to like guilt my parents if I find them bringing home single use plastic wrapped items, but then you can only do so much.
Yeah. But I do think like giving yourself grace, right? So the situation may be temporary or it may not, but you have to give yourself grace. And you not all of us are going to be perfect. I for sure am not perfect. Like I'm not a vegan. But I would much prefer like a million people do the sustainability journey imperfectly than have 100 people doing it perfectly. And I think in this space, there has to be a lot of grace and coming from a place of support and community rather than like activists trying to like shove values
Yeah.
down their throat. I feel like that is potentially more jarring
Yeah.
and not as helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. Like, I think as long as you're educating and you're like, this is the right thing, but like ultimately it's your decision and your
Hmm.
life. And you're right, like I'm not perfect in any way. I use a plastic toothbrush that I'm like sometimes afraid to admit because I'm like, oh, I'm so like always preachy. But then yeah, like it's hard to go completely zero waste too. And you're right, that quote of a million people being imperfectly sustainable rather than like 100 people perfect has such a larger scale impact.
And I feel like too, like as long as you leave that door open to have that conversation with the people in your life, I think that's big, right? So they might not make the change now, but if you are persistent about that own change that you're making in your own life, maybe they'll come around in 6 months or a year. And to be able to have that conversation when they're in that place and they're open to it,
Mhm.
you never know, right?
Mhm. And with your business and like, what you're doing, what do you hope, like, where do you hope to be in like the next like 5 years, 10 years? What is like that big thing that you're like, I want to get there?
Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but sustainability that's accessible for all is like my end goal, it's my end mission. It's something that I really want to achieve in my lifetime. And so my hope is that sustainability becomes a word that we don't necessarily need to use because it becomes the norm. And
Mhm.
so people that are living the current lifestyle that's a little bit more single use plastic and more wasteful, that becomes the alternative. And I don't want to say they become the outcast, but that becomes the like not the norm.
I love that. Oh, that's super, super inspiring. Like, making it accessible for all. I think that's such a good mission and value to have. So I wanted to end this with a rapid fire
Okay.
question, if you're cool with that. So it's just like the fast five. So if you answer these in 1 to 5 words,
Oh
and first thing
goodness.
that comes to
Okay.
mind, but also no pressure. Like if you want to expand, go for it. So the first one is, what is your go-to sustainable brand?
Oh, these are tough questions.
I mean, there's no wrong answer.
Right? I love shopping at Nada. I'm a big believer in who they are and their mission as a company.
I love that. Would you go back in time or would you go into the future?
I think I would go into the future. I feel like that would push the movement forward and maybe become more accessible.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Um,
I'm a firm believer that I would not redo the past because those experiences have helped shape me. So I don't know that I would go back and redo anything.
yeah. I truly, truly believe that too. I think about that sometimes. The past hasn't always been the best, but
Hmm.
because of what happened in the past has led me to where I am today. And I would never change where I am today because, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, the next one is, what advice would you give your younger self?
Have more balls. um, it's so funny when I think back to who I was as a teenager. I This may sound like a shocker, but I was an introvert. I was not comfortable in my own skin. I hated talking to people. And now when I think of who I am 10 or more years later, I'm just more comfortable with who I am and I will pick up those conversations that were maybe awkward way back when.
Oh, I love that. Okay, the next one is, what change do you want to see in the world?
So for sustainability to become the norm is like the number one. But I think for us to become more accepting of each other is like a secondary to that. So appreciating that we all live different lifestyles, we all have different values. And so I think there can be so much judgment, especially now in this like social media prevalent world. And I want to see us become a little bit more loving of each other.
I love that.
That
Um,
was cheesy.
no, that definitely, I'm all for the, maybe I just love cheesiness because I'm like, that's such a beautiful thing. Like, no matter what your background is, where you're from, how sustainable you are or you aren't, as long as you're a good person and you care about other people, I think that has such a larger impact than like whether you use a bamboo toothbrush or a plastic toothbrush. Like,
Exactly.
right? And like the how you put yourself out there. I think that's it's not cheesy at all. I'm all here for the
Thank
cheese.
you.
And then the last question is, how do you practice self-care?
Oh, this question, especially in the time of a pandemic, is so challenging.
Yeah.
I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but when this pandemic started, I was in like hyper productivity. All I could think of was business and timelines and strategic plans and like, what can I accomplish today? So I used to accomplish like 100 things in a day, and I was so proud of that. And now I've learned to live in a little bit of that discomfort and just give myself a little bit of grace for where I am and what I'm feeling today. And so self care sometimes looks like a Netflix day. Sometimes it looks like going for a run in the forest, socially distanced, of course.
That's awesome. I agree. And I think that's why I wanted to ask that, because especially in a time like today, with this pandemic, it's more important than ever to recognize like what we're doing for self-care and separating,
Mhm.
because like we're all like adjusting to new routines, we're all like adjusting to this new kind of lifestyle. And even once we recover from this pandemic, we're never going to go back to that what normal was.
Exactly.
So it's so important now more than ever to like make sure we're taking care of ourselves, as well as other people and like the planet. And um, I love that. Yeah, it looks different for everybody, and it looks different every day too. And
Mhm. And I am also living for Zoom calls and virtual happy hours because for me now, I like thrive and I need moments of connection and I need conversation. And so I think for me, that's a big part of my self care is how can I schedule in those happy hours at least on a weekly basis with people?
yeah, I know. I feel that too. Like I've never been a video call kind of person because I value like the in person connection, but I
Hmm.
value this way more because if this is all we have, how do we make the best out of a situation and
Exactly.
still getting that time to connect like us today? And this is like, I'm gonna leave this episode and just like reflect on all those things that I learned today from our conversation. So definitely the value in connecting with people that you love. And
Hmm.
yeah, so thank you so much again for chatting with me. Is there any final thoughts that you have that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I should have brought this up earlier, but I think sustainability looks different for everyone, right? So when we think of like the four pillars of sustainability, more so in business, but there's the environmental sustainability, which is like your typical going green, looking at like how we impact the planet, but there's also human sustainability. So that more relates to like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and human capital, so to speak. And then there's the social and economic sustainability. So I think for each individual or each business or each group, the sustainable definition will look different and those priorities will be different. So, really doing a deep dive and reflection on what sustainability means to you, um, and going from there.
That's awesome. Thank you for ending it with that, because I think that's like a huge takeaway from this whole episode and in general is like it looks different. And like, thank you, Natasha. This has been so great. And I'm sure like anyone that's listening, no matter what background they're in, what industry they work in, is going to be inspired and learn something new, like, or if not, a few new things. So
Hmm.
thank you for offering your wisdom, your time, and just like being such an inspiration to the world and just the community. And I'm so excited to see what happens with the wedding show that may be postponed. Is that what's happening, or
TBD.
TBD? I'm excited to see, because I know the face behind it. I know she's gonna, no matter what curveballs are thrown at her, she's gonna make the best out of it, and it's gonna be so good. So how can we find you if people want to learn more about
Hmm.
you?
So my website, clearwaterevents.org. I'm on Instagram at clearwater.events. Find me on social, interact with me. I love hearing from people. And I'm always available for a virtual coffee chat.
Love it. Awesome. So, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And this week, so every week we recommend something like either a brand or a business or something that's sustainable. And this week I wanted to give a shout out to Nada because I know they're
It's
one
so
of your
funny.
favorites. Yeah. Well, I actually was thinking about it because I know they're one of your favorites, and then you brought them up several times. Do you want to do the honor of explaining what Nada
So
grocery store is?
Nada is based in Vancouver. They are a great zero waste grocery store. So they have produce, they have refillery products, like if you want lifestyle soaps and detergents and all of those things. And then they also have this adorable little cafe with swings in their store too. And I would say they are one of the leaders in this zero waste grocery store concept here in Vancouver. And they spearheaded that movement a couple years ago. So grateful for all the work that they've done so far in getting us to where we are, because it's helped precipitate so many other stores that are doing similar things in different regions.
Yeah, I love that. So shout out to Nada. Check them out if you're in Vancouver and you're supporting a local business. You're supporting a movement. And yeah, I hope someone from Nada listens to this. But yeah, thank you so much. I will see you next week, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.